Alright, y'all, so today I want to make a very quick video to give you my thoughts on a really interesting canceled and lost Fantastic Four film that we could have gotten in the early 2000s. That was originally directed by Raja Gosnell, the same guy who did the live-action Scooby-Doo movies. It was also supposed to be produced by Chris Columbus with an ideal budget of $75 million alongside another producer, probably with an ideal release date of the early 2000s. So, on a personal side note, I'm a big fan of the live action Scooby Doo movies, and I mean, the idea that that same guy who did those movies almost did a Fantastic Four film in the 2000s, or at least instead, is kind of crazy to me. So, I kind of wanted to make this video to discuss it. So, I want to discuss a little bit of history, context, what the film could have been, why it was canceled, and of course, my overall opinions. So, first, a little bit of history. So in the mid to late 90s, Fox had been trying to get a Fantastic Four film, off the ground for a long time, and were really unsuccessful in doing so. Chris Columbus was briefly attached to direct the Fantastic Four film for Fox, but he dropped out in early 1997, but he stayed on as a producer. Peter Segal in early 1997 was briefly attached, but he left the project. And then Sam Weisman was attached in late 1997, but then he would leave the project at some point in 1998. In an effort to kind of bring down the spiraling budget for Fantastic Four, which was one of the big issues why it hadn't yet been made. Sam Hamm was brought on in early 1998 to pen the screenplay and rewrite it. He would work with Fox throughout the year 1998 and probably through 1999 and maybe 2000 before eventually he would leave the project due to creative differences. And this kind of leaves us into the story of our video. Fantastic Four, at this point in the year 2000, as it would roll along, was without a director. It was kind of in limbo at Fox. There wasn't exactly a director attached. There wasn't exactly a solid writer. Chris Columbus was producing it, but he was, like I said, focused on other projects. It wasn't his priority. So Fantastic Four just kind of remained in limbo. That is, of course, when the man of our story comes into view. Raja Gosnell, who's mainly kind of a family-friendly kid background in terms of his filmography, kind of pitched what he thought would work well in a Fantastic Four film. He kind of pitched what he thought, could work. And when he, pitched it to Fox executives, his vision of the Fantastic Four movie, he said he could deliver a big action comedy thrill ride like Men in Black. Also, he said that he described his version of Fantastic Four to be also more like a sitcom, which apparently when these comments were made public, they would spark backlash from Fantastic Four fans and Marvel fans, especially around the word of sitcom and comedy. People didn't like that term associated with the Fantastic Four, apparently. That being said, Gosnell, while he pitched his version and wanted the job, he was also being courted by different other studios, especially Warner Brothers, who wanted him to direct a live-action Scooby-Doo film. At this point, around the same time, X-Men had just came out in the year 2000, and it was a huge success for Fox, and obviously that film kicked off the major superhero boom in the 2000s. So Fox, who had any, doubt about Fantastic Four, was pretty much gone. X-Men made a lot of money. They're moving full steam ahead with an X-Men sequel. So Fantastic Four was given the complete green light to go ahead. Tom Rothman, the Fox president at that time, wanted to fast-track the project after the success of the X-Men movie. He also wanted to give it a budget around the, similar to X-Men, like $75 million. And eventually, Raja Gosnell would eventually win Fox over, and he would sign on to direct Fantastic Four in the year 2000. And at this point, he would work with his producer, Columbus, his co-producer, Michael Barnathan, and, with possibly working with a screenplay from Sam Hamm. Now, what could have been this movie? There's really not much to know. I did put an image of Raja next to like a maquette of The Thing, which was published by the LA Times when it was announced he was going to direct. So kind of a little fun side note there. There's not really too much to go on. I mean, there wasn't really too much concept art when he was attached to the project. In terms of a screenplay, there's not much as well. The only thing that I can speculate is that it seemed like he was working with Sam Hamm's screenplay, which the only version of that that's been shown online was a version from 1998. And I did like a separate video covering it, and yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of that screenplay. I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. It wasn't really that good. But that being said, there's not really too much to go on in terms of what his vision and what was actually done in pre-production for this movie as far as I'm making this at the time of making this video. But it does seem pretty interesting, especially since at that time there was some backlash to some of his choices and the terms that he was using to make Fantastic Four. Now let's get into why the film ultimately got canceled and scrapped. So Gosnell, like I said, he was pitching his idea. He described his movie, using words like comedy, and it was going to be like a sitcom, and, it was supposed to be not taken too seriously. And this sparked major backlash from Fantastic Four fans and Marvel fans online and kind of the burgeoning, internet blog scene. Marvel kind of did some damage control when Gosnell was attached to the project, basically saying that we totally believe in Gosnell's vision. We think that he's the right pick for Fantastic Four. He's the right guy for it, guys. Don't worry about it. The way he's describing the movie, it's like I said, it's a right choice. But eventually, his version of Fantastic Four at Fox would eventually stall. It seemed like the backlash to some of his comments that he made out of the movie really did their effect. But also, at the same time, the film was also going through another round of delays. It seemed like Fox, despite being gung-ho about fast-tracking the movie and getting in with the $75 million budget, it seemed like, despite all that talk, it seemed like the film stalled again. It seemed like they couldn't get a workable screenplay in shape for a movie to start shooting. It seemed like, too, the film was having some budget issues. And in general, it was going to take a lot longer to make Fantastic Four than probably originally intended by the director who got attached to direct it. So, eventually, the decision was made. Raja Gosnell decided to make the decision that he still intended on making Fantastic Four. He said he initially planned that he was going to do the movie, but he decided to jump ship to Warner Brothers, take him up on their offer to direct the live-action Scooby-Doo instead, because that film was more ready to go than Fantastic Four. And initially, he claimed that he was going to do Fantastic Four right after Scooby-Doo, but of course, as time went on, this obviously didn't happen, and of course, other directors came in to take the role from him. So, that being said, after he jump shipped to Scooby-Doo, this effectively killed, obviously, Ryan Gosnell's attempt and his version of Fantastic Four completely. And once again, the film was without a director, and it was kind of in limbo again. Columbus was still attached as a producer, but eventually he was kind of pegged down by Fox to become an executive producer, kind of barely evolved with the final product that we got in 2005. Also wanted to mention, in 2001, Peyton Reed would actually sign on to direct Fantastic Four, which his version would also collapse, and then eventually would get the Tim Story version in 2005. Now, for my overall thoughts on what could have been Raja Gosnell's Fantastic Four. To be honest with you, I'm quite mixed about it. I personally think that his track record, he's made some really good, kid-friendly, quality films. But, I think personally, I don't know, his track record's a bit mixed. It's kind of hit and miss. I personally also really enjoy the live-action Scooby-Doo movies. They're kind of like my personal childhood favorites when I think about other films that I watched when I was a kid, and I personally really enjoyed those movies. And, he jumped shipped from Fantastic Four to do Scooby-Doo. So I personally think, in a little bit of a personal bias kind of way, I feel like he may have made the right decision to do Scooby-Doo instead of Fantastic Four. I just don't see him doing all these crazy action sequences, especially dealing with the team's powers and Doctor Doom. And, kind of dealing with the other elements that involve the Fantastic Four. I just don't think Raja would have done a great job at making the movie, especially dealing with those action sequences and other elements, I just feel like he probably wasn't the best fit for it. Even, like I said, even Tim's story I don't think was necessarily a great fit for the 2005 movie, but at least I think in my opinion he handled it a little bit better. And plus, I really enjoy the live action Scooby Doo. I have a little bit of a soft spot for that movie, so I am a little bit glad that we ended up with that movie instead of course, the one that he was originally supposed to do, which was Fantastic Four. So yeah, I don't know. A little bit, I think it's personally for the best that the movie never happened. All right, y'all. So today I just want to give you my quick thoughts. So that was my thoughts on Raja Gosnell's Fantastic Four. Hopefully y'all enjoyed the video, kind of like my rambling. Hopefully y'all also have a nice day, and peace. Stay safe, y'all.